I was regarded at Harvard Business School as being a communist.
This one is a bit of a mystery still, when my first tweet is going to happen.
Ken is fun, and Ken is a great friend to Barbie.
I call it catching the F train.
I was just this fat unit, you know what I mean, in a suit, and it was clear that I was not the same as the others.
Hi everybody, welcome to episode 19 of Better Marketing, back where most of them are done in my study, not on the beach at Cannes sadly, but today's guest, it would have been wonderful to have seen him in Cannes because he was one of the stars of the show, not surprisingly, because David Droga is the most awarded creative of all time, the youngest ever recipient of the Lion of St. Mark award at the Cannes Lion. But I wanted to start kind of broad because obviously these days, you know, you're chairman, creative chairman and CEO of Accenture Song. Still got Droga 5 in the house. Extraordinary story that you built there. But it'd be great if you could share your story, because you know I know you were raised in, I think, the snowy mountains, weren't you, in Australia?
You know, there are times when I sit in New York still as someone who's lived in New York longer as an adult than I have in Australia as an adult. But it still hits me every so often. How did a guy who sort of spent his youth playing with wombats and riding dirt bikes in the summer and skiing in the winter end up here? And I get a kick out of it, but also I appreciate the journey. I can't make sense of the journey, but I certainly appreciate it. But I would put it down to look, as we're all massively influenced by our circumstances and our surroundings, but also your parents. And I have my mother was a Danish poet, artist. So she was worldly, even though we're in the middle of nowhere. Her entire life was making her kids see beyond where we were, to see the world and see opportunity and our contribution and art and just beyond the limitations of where we were. And I think that that's something that made me curious and work with that. And also because I grew up in such a remote part, and I was the fifth boy, and then I have two younger sisters. I was sort of so low in the totem pole. To me, new was getting something that had only been owned by one of my brothers previously. So my entire life was spent reinterpreting other people's things and make it something relevant to me or something interesting. So I feel like that's part of almost what we do now, is we take inputs and we create them and we hope to make them interesting. And there probably is also that competitive thing that comes from being so far down the totem pole. But my imagination was really my greatest asset, and I had to rely on that. And I'm so lucky that I sort of parlayed that into a job and a career. You know what I mean?
And I think, did you start in the mailroom? I read somewhere, but I also read that you actually had a proper job at FCB.
It did start in the mailroom actually. It's one of those great things, and again, it's quite delicious now looking back on that. I started in the mailroom at 18 because I BS'd my parents that I was going to go to university, but I had no interest because I'd been at boarding school for 9 years because of my location that I'd grown up in. So I was ready to get out of any institutions. I just wanted to get to working and get to writing. I just wanted to be a writer. And I sort of told my parents I was going to get in, but then I saw this job for a mail boy. I didn't even know what it meant, but in an advertising agency. And I just went for that job. I remember making the person laugh who interviewed me. I was thinking, I think I might have got the job because I think I made a joke that made him laugh. But more important than that is, the two people in any organization that know the most about what's going on in any company are the dispatch person in dispatch, mail boy or girl. At the time it was very male, so mail boy, and the CEO. They're the two people who know the depth and breadth of what's really going on. And one does it from leadership and power and strength, which is the CEO, and the other one does it from being invisible and stealth and being helpful. So I spent the first 6 months of my mail boy job, delivering mail, but every time I would linger. I would linger and listen to what the creatives were doing, thinking, wow, that sounds more interesting and dynamic than the other departments. And I would overhear things and pause. And so you just got to know the ins and outs of a corporation. And I remember thinking when I was delivering mail on a lot of the creatives' desks, this is now where my arrogance kicks in. I was like, I think I can write better than that. I mean, that looks like... And then there was a course called Australian Writers and Art Directors which was run by the industry, which was a nationwide thing. And it was it was run by the industry to get new talent creative into the advertising. It's still going today. And I applied for that with a portfolio, and I would do that at night times. You know, work in the mailroom during the day, do that at night. When everyone else, all my friends were sort of out drinking, and you know, I'm like, no, I'm gonna make this choice to try and leapfrog the expectations to get into a creative department, because I was telling people I wanted to be a writer, and they were like, well, you've got to go through from the mailroom to the production department, through the media department, whatever it was like, you know, some sort of maze. I thought the direct line is to do well at this course, so I worked hard. And something clicked where I just really liked it, and I found the problem solving of the emotion of it and all that was fantastic. And I was very fortunate that I was top student for New South Wales and also top student for Australia. So I got about 4 or 5 job offers straight away, and FCB was one of them. I couldn't believe it. Staring at it now, it would be a computer, but then I was staring at a blank piece of paper thinking, wow, I'm being paid to think of something with a marker and stuff. It was just this profound, amazing thing to realize that actually it all came down to what I put on this paper, the ideas that were coming out of my head. But it was also very strange then as well, because at the same time I was teamed up with someone who, as an art director, who wasn't a very nice person but wasn't very good. So I became very self-sufficient, thinking I want to be the writer and the art director. I want to sort of do it all myself. Maybe that's again from being this young kid who wanted to. And I was really into it, but this new agency started in Australia, with these feisty young creative leaders who were, you know, I was 19, they were like mid-20s, but they were sort of seen as this new breed of creatives, and they was quite celebrated. And they started an agency, and they rang me and asked me if I'd be their first employee. And I was thinking, oh my God, this is a great opportunity. And what was interesting is they offered me a third less money than I was earning, and I wasn't earning that much already. I was earning, you know, just enough to get by. They had no clients, they had no furniture in the office. But what they did have, they had ambition, and they had a desire to do really interesting creative work. And I was like, yeah, cool, I got nothing to lose, because I got nothing, so I got nothing to lose. I quit my job at FCB, having done really nothing there in 6 months, 1 or 2 things, and became their first employee. And I still remember the day my dad telling me, you're quitting a big multinational for a third less money, which is still next to nothing, with no guarantee, no certainties, no security, anything. And I'm like, absolutely, because they have ambition and a desire to do something of quality. And I was like, and that was one of the great things. And I don't know why I had that epiphany, but I did it, and it boomed from the get-go, and my career just flourished. Because being the main writer there, all the success we had, I was part of. Not knowing that I was part of, you know, you don't think about it in that kind of, but we just boomed, and we were agency of the year, you know, year after year after year, and we grew, and I moved up the ranks to where I was a creative director at 22. And it was so exciting to me to be part of something that the work mattered, and it was setting benchmarks, and clients loved us, and we were building a culture, and I didn't even know that that's what it was. I didn't know there was anything different than that.
As I've kind of talked to people about you, a couple of guys that used to work with you at Saatchi's remember you fondly in London as the best creative director they've ever worked with. So not just your own work, but your ability to help others do great work, which you know, that thing when many a creative director does it themselves, but actually your ability to go, no, it's in there, you've got that, work on it, to push people along. Do you remember Saatchi London fondly?
I remember Saatchi London so fondly. I mean, it's still to this day, it was such a monumental part of my makeup, because it was, first of all, I laughed every day. I've never laughed more in my life at this miserable British sense of humour, the pessimism, the self-deprecation, even in the worst days. But it was an amazing thing, because also, just the backstory to that is, I moved from this job in Australia to Saatchi's Singapore first. You know, there's a guy called Bob Isham, who's the worldwide creative director of Saatchi's, and he would always offer me a job every year. It was almost like a Christmas card. I'd get a job to be like you can be run Saatchi New Zealand, or you can run Saatchi Sydney. And it was always, every job would get better and better, until eventually he offered me to run Saatchi Singapore, which was an amazing thing for me, because it was the first time, to your point about being a creative director, where I realized previously then, even though I was a creative director in Australia, I was still very much about, I had to come up with the idea, I wanted to come up with the idea. And I suddenly realized when I got to Singapore that I got as much joy seeing, any idea. I didn't care whether it was mine or not, just seeing a great idea happen. And even more, slightly more joy if you could help nurture it for other people and bring it out of them, and sometimes that is being heavy-handed, and sometimes that is just standing back and tearing apart. It was so amazing for me, and that was a seismic part of my career. So that when I got to London, it was a big deal too, as well, because I was intimidated by London. Anyone in Australia, you sort of grow up with one eye on British advertising, one eye on American advertising, but secretly we're all sort of drawn more to the British advertising. I was, sort of the Saatchi days, the gold, the Dave Trott days, the Hal Henry, these were great agencies doing amazing stuff. So when I got to London via Singapore, the reception was so chilling and cold. It was quite funny because, that was the first import to this country as a foreigner, this very proud advertising market, which was sort of seen as the halo of the market. I was 29, via Singapore, Australian. So it's like a trifecta of insults to the British industry. And the reception was so weird and, as I said, chilling, that it almost had the reverse effect, that it made me laugh. I was like, oh, okay, all right, I get it. No one wants me here. So I try and focus on it. I said, all I'm going to do is focus on the work and make them realize that I am here about the work, and they'll get to know me. Speeches I give aren't going to reassure them. My actions are, and when they sit down and they realize that I'm going to fight for them and protect them and push them and all that. And it just changed, and as the work started to go, and we had a lot of great work that I was still to this day very proud of. If I look back at my entire career, every single part from Australia, Singapore, London, the start of Droga 5, the whole of Droga 5, now I'm trying to do it. Just the communities we built around a belief and an ambition to try and do something more than just sort of play the game, but to actually do something that raised the bar and contributed and fought and proved out the value of creativity. That's been something that has motivated me. And I wish it's exhausting being me because I wish I didn't care so much. I always say that to anyone. I'm like, once you care about something and you had a taste of making things or being part of something that is relevant and matters, you can't flick that switch. And I just love it. It's such a privilege to be given that.
No, and it shines through in your work. I mean, I think what happened after that is you had the management call further upstairs in New York, and now you're global creative director of, I think, the whole of the Publicis Group. And the bit of that story I love is you got to the bit of going, well, yeah, I like doing the work. and you didn't like, so this combination of focus on the work and focus on culture, which I think, as you get to the big jobs, is very difficult to balance. I mean, and obviously Droga 5, you then built from nowhere with a stunning piece of work, which we all saw on the news media without knowing what it was.
Well, it was an exciting time because, I sort of took the job I think I was probably seduced by the ego or title of taking the Publicis global job. Again, it was the challenge of it as well. I was like, I want to be the one who can turn this and da-da-da. But I quickly learned that I was more sort of a figurehead and a mascot than I was, because a lot of, creative titles, they don't come with any authority, real authority to change things. And I was very much at this phase where I was early 30s thinking, I'm not looking to retire. And I'll always bet on myself. So normally people get paid enough money where they stay in the job because they're too scared of leaping out of it. I was like, I don't care. I've walked out of jobs before. I was thinking, I do want to start something where I can really see if I am as good as I think I am, or my belief system is as true as I think it is. And New York is New York, where the scale is so immense. You don't have to be for everybody. I just had to be for somebody. And I started not with a business plan, but again with that sort of like conviction. And it was so exciting because I remember, week 2, I did the classic thing where when I resigned to my job, I walked out with a box and all that. So a client stopped me on the way out saying, I think it was GE, saying, can we be your first client? I'm like, yes, please. And then walked out. But then a week into it, it was just myself, my secretary, and I think a producer, ex-Saatchi London. And then I hired another creative person as well. I get a call from Mark Echo, who is a big growing fashion brand here, sort of streetwear. And I've always been drawn to, as I said, not thinking about what they're expecting, but what would be right for them. And I knew that in New York, again, it was also at the start of the internet, which was such a a good timing. That's where it's just good luck for me that I set my agency at that time, because any idea could become the most seen idea, not based on media spend. It just became based on what you created. And I do remember writing that script at the kitchen table, which I still have in my apartment. But I've never been afraid of presenting something that I thought was the right thing to do, even if we didn't know how we were going to do something, or if it had been done before, or if I could pull it off. Like, that goes back to so many of Droga 5 things you look at, and people are thinking, how did you guys pull that off? How did you convince this person to do that, or the collaboration? And I'm like, because I think great ideas bring centers of gravity, and they bring people towards it, and people. So the same thing with that. I remember reading him a 7-page script about, people breaking into Andrews Air Force Base, climbing this thing, and all this sort of stuff. And all I'm thinking as I'm reading it, thinking, he's either going to be thinking, you are the craziest idiot I've ever had. What was I doing? And at the end of the script, when I read it, it's one of the few times in my career where I'm like, wow, am I being too conservative? He was like, he goes, can one of these people die at the end? Like,
That's terrible.
I'm like, what? Because can one of them get shot? And I'm like, well, first of all, no, because if someone was shot, then people would know it wasn't real. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, the whole essence of this is that they pulled this audacious stunt off and broke into Andrews Air Force Base. And, not White House, because that's too obvious and too much detail. But Andrews Air Force Base and Air Force One is one of those things where everyone knows it, but it's not familiar enough with it that it could have happened. And it was so exciting to do, because also at the same time, then we've got our first office space. Trying to rent a 747 anonymously there's just a book in that. There was we went through 3 different people who wanted to rent. The first guy who lived in Mexico, because we had to paint half this one side of the plane to look like the Air Force One. He wanted both sides, and we're like, okay, that's dodgy. We can't use this guy. Then another one we found out was owned by the CIA. We're like, can't do that. And eventually get one. But if someone had broke into our office and seen, it was photos of Air Force One, Andrews Air Force Base, with film lines where we're going to film from. But they're things we'd shoot from here, you'd think that we were honestly going to assassinate someone.
Yeah.
And we filmed that, and it was, again, it's so exciting when you're on the precipice of doing things that you really believe, can we pull it off? How are we going to pull it off? Having to drive actually past Andrews Air Force Base with a camera outside the car multiple times to get the opening scene, knowing that these people are thinking, why is these people, we're breaking so many laws by doing this. And again, the privilege of, this is when Bush had put in the Patriot Act, and I was told that, this is, if we were caught, it's breaking the Patriot Act because we could go to jail and da-da. And again, I was thinking, well, they won't do that, I'm a new agency, they're not going to put an Australian ad guy in jail. Let's just do it, you know what I mean? Yeah. And it blew up. And I still remember to this day, 3 days after it was out, people calling me, just not personally about that, but just in random conversation, did you see that thing? Has someone did this? And I was like, yeah. So eventually I was like, I can't believe this has actually become mainstream and being on the news. And then Mark Echo actually got really nervous, because after a week he had to come out and confess it was he, which worked perfectly. But it set a precedent for us, which was, again, which I've tried to instill all the way through Droga 5. And even though I'm not in Droga 5 anymore, I'm trying to sort of make sure that they don't lose, is honestly, do what you think is right for the client, do what you think is the right solution for them, understand who you're talking to, why they would care about it. Because straight after that, I think Procter & Gamble or another big asked us if we could do a Air Force One for them, and I'm like, no. It's got nothing to do with, that sort of hoax or audacious thing is not you. And people wanted to pigeonhole Droga 5 in the early years about, oh, you are the viral agency, or you are the hoax agency, or you are the youth agency. I'm like, no, I just want us to be the smartest agency.
Yeah. Well, indeed you were, and you were agency of the decade and many, many gongs. And then, of course, you got bought by Accenture Interactive. And I think I'll put myself in the camp of, I was surprised and delighted to see that you'd become the CEO of Accenture Interactive, because that makes you the only passionate, creative person with a phenomenal track record at the top of any of the companies servicing clients, that must be a very satisfying feeling, but equally daunting, I imagine.
Well, the surprise you have, I'm surprised as well that I said yes, and it's one of those things, but it was never engineered or planned, or that was not some premeditated thing. If we go back just a tiny bit, I was always fiercely proud of our independence because it's allowed us to do what we thought was right. But I was also very aware that I didn't want us to just be the best in a shrinking industry, or the best, part of our influence and power is who we collaborate with and how we make ourselves more relevant with partnership and joining forces. So in 2015, I sold a minority of the agency, Droga, right, to Hollywood, to Ari Emanuel, the person from sort of, that sort of fame, with Endeavour, or it was called William Morris Endeavour at the time. And that's because I really believed in the power that they had of, as I said, the massive entertainment, and they were complementary, and we could both help each other, and I just wanted to expand the aperture of what Droga 5 should and could be. We also had the best production, we had the best strategy, we had the best accounts. Like, honestly, it was like, some sort of infinity stones we'd collected. I don't think there's been a better assembly of leadership, at least in my time in the industry. And I was very privileged to have that. So I felt that if this team could stand toe-to-toe with anyone, so we weren't intimidated by Hollywood or anything like that. So that proved, to be very strong for us. But it was interesting. But I actually came out thinking, actually, we're even more independent. We can do more. We don't just have to be limited to that. And then we did the industry changed so much, and I felt like I don't want to sit on the sidelines and try and be the best iceberg that's shrinking. You can be best in an industry that's shrinking. As I said, the best way to show our worth is to, as I said, to future-proof ourselves. And unbeknownst to me, we were asked to do a global pitch, a nationwide pitch in the US for a huge government piece of business by a company called Accenture Interactive. I'd never heard of them. And we did this pitch for them. It was like, a $500 million fee client. And it was so incredible because it involved so much tech understanding and rollout and deployment and systems and everything, and also the creative and the storytelling and the design and everything. And we brought our strategy and all that to it. It was like, wow, we are really going to make the American public do this, and I felt really great about it. And then I watched them present their part of the equation, which was so phenomenal to me about how they really it was like a light bulb when I was thinking, wow, everything that we're trying to do, if it's connected to actually it being deployed and working and real technology and real digital understanding, because it's one thing, I can make people want to, go and sign, contribute to the census and all that sort of stuff. But, the questions of a government official asking is, well, what happens if it's, making this up, what if it's raining on a Tuesday in New Orleans and they can't get the information, or no amount of storytelling and narrative or design is going to make that. And they just had a way to make things happen. I was like, wow, this is real world stuff. So it was kind of a real epiphany for me. I was thinking, these guys needed us because they were blown away by what we were presenting. And I could see my crew, and we were sitting around thinking, wow, what they do is really amazing and influential, the power of technology. And people always think that as a creative person that you have to choose a side, that data and technology are there to stifle and smother creativity. I'm like, well, yeah, if you let it. But the opposite is if you can find a way for them to be complementary, and then it can just amplify it. Now, it wasn't that I was thinking, I want to do a deal with them, but they pursued me for 3 years to do a deal. And I wasn't anti it, but we didn't have to do a deal. So it was one of those classic things where we just slowly, courted each other and talked, but there was no vulnerable party or anything. And by the time I agreed to do it, I thought, actually, you know what? We may be the tail that can wag this dog, and what they do is so relevant to where society is going and where corporations are going, and business is going. Every business is a digital business at its core, and if it's not going to succeed. Period. And so much of what our industry thinks it is with tech and all that, they're just tech appreciation, as opposed to really understand the power and how to create it, make it, manage it, and all that. And so by the time we did a deal, again, it was one of those things. I'm like, okay, we're going into it with great confidence. They had such respect for us, and I knew that everyone would be thinking, "Oh, is this the death of creativity?" I'm like, no. Again, we've got to bet on ourselves as an industry, I'm saying. Bet that we are more influential than we give ourselves credit for. And there's no question, culturally wise, at that scale, they're different, and we have to get to know each other, and different sort of ways of thinking about things. But as far as respectful, nice, intelligent, really put the client first, I was like, yeah, they're the real deal. And then the partnership came together. Obviously, the industry cried shock horror that Droga's selling out and he's trying to cash out, and it's the death of creativity. Year and a half later, Agency of the Decade, Adweek. Agency of the Year, Agency of the Decade, Ad Age. Year after that, Agency of the Year, Ad Age. It was just like our work wasn't compromised. Grand Prix every year for film and everything, and every, there was no compromise in the work. I would say it actually showed that it just got bigger and we got more comprehensive, and we went for global clients. And I could now stand in front of clients and know that I'm not trying to solve one thing with just one tool. But creativity is still the tip of the spear. Ambition and humanity is still there, but it's backed by this absolutely incredible machine. And I don't mean machine in a blunt, offensive way. I mean it's why can't we do the impactful, the memorable, the emotional, and sort of toggle up to the accountable, the repeatable, the scalable, all that sort of stuff. But creative is still the tip of the spear. And so I was very taken by this partnership. I knew it was going to be hard, but again, that's why I sort of bet on us and our people. Nothing good is easy. But I wasn't still looking to do, I had no ambition to be a CEO of Accenture Interactive. And then when Julie Sweet, who's the new leader of big Accenture, and remember, this is a Fortune 30 company, so it's like, 200 and something plus $billion company. And she's, very dynamic, very smart. She's really driving this company well. When she took me out for lunch, I thought it was just to sort of check in, see how I'm doing. I think she was nervous that, my earn-out had finished and all that sort of stuff. And, I've never made a decision based on I've never made a decision based on money, by the way. But don't get me wrong, I've always thought that whatever decision I make, if I do it, we should be compensated accordingly. You know what I mean? But in the meeting, the lunch, she's like, oh, by the way, I would love you to be the CEO of Accenture Interactive. And I was like, what? Because, I think you should lead this. At this stage, it was an $11 billion company. I'm like, do you know what you're asking? I said, I'm a creative. Yes, I'm a business creative because I built my own company, but you don't want me. I'm not a linear thinker. I'm a creative person. I'm a constellation thinker. I'm sort of ambition and da-da-da. I'm not sort of, the operations going on. And to her credit, this is why she's smiling the other bit, she's like, that's not what we need. That's not what the future needs. It needs people who have vision. It needs people who drive culture. It needs people who care about product and all the things that I believe. It's like, damn, she's trying to snooker me here. And she's like, and I can surround you with all the operations people you want. And then it sort of hit me again, which is this flaw that I have, which goes back to sort of my childhood. It's like, a creative person has to run this company. Like a creative person has to run a company of this influential and this scale, because if they don't, it's just going to be another suit who's, because most CEOs are about extraction, right? How much can I get out of this client? How much can I get out of this quarter? How, what I mean? And I think creative people are about addition, value add. Like, what can I contribute to this? And that's not to say every CEO is a bad CEO and every creative one is a great one, but I think the fundamental principles are different.
Yeah.
And it just struck me, again, it's one of those things where, if not me, who type of thing. And, if I didn't do it, I was probably on a path to retire anyway, because I'd ticked every box I wanted to tick in my career in advertising. Not ticked every box to tick, but I ticked every box I wanted to, and I'd sort of set up Droga 5 for the next gen and all that sort of stuff. And I sort of had that moment where I was thinking, wow, it's such a challenge, and it's been a long time since I've been intimidated and excited. And no creative's done that. Shame on me if I don't try it. We'll probably close the year out at 14 billion, so it's working. We're attracting some great talent. The work is getting better and better. We still, I've never been happy with it. By the way, I've never ever finished any year out where I've gone like, I'm satisfied with the work we've produced. Anyway,
Yeah.
even in Droga 5, even though there's things that I'm very proud that we've done, I always think that we can do more and we can be more helpful and more impactful, and there's more opportunities to do. But it's a surprise that I'm doing it. So look, I'm still shocked that I'm doing it. And it's amazing. And I'm sort of, once you cut through the acronyms and the sort of, all the different muscles that I haven't used before, I said the principles are still the same. We've got to build a profitable business. We have to show up and show out for our clients and be relevant. We've got to justify our value to them. And, we're in an industry that is compromising its way to growth, which is such a dangerous thing. If now the average pitch you go to comes down to who's willing to knock down their fees, I don't want to be in that business.
Yeah.
So instead of us finding ways to be cheaper, I want us to find ways to justify our price and our value. And we need to get faster, and we need to be sort of more consistent and all that sort of stuff as an industry. But
Yes, I always found the naming of Accenture Interactive bizarre. And when somebody said to me, "So what do you think of Song?" I said, I could riff off that. It's really nice. So can you talk a little bit about that? And I know you've had some tough decisions to make because, Brian Whipple before you assembled a phenomenal group of companies, Monkeys, Karmarama and so on. And actually to take the decision to go the Song route and to bring it all together as Song. Tell us about that, because that brings together creative, branding, culture, and I guess all your wisdom and experience and people skills to make it happen.
well, you give me a lot more credit than I deserve. But look, I think the thing is, and we'll get to, there's this side question about Droga 5. We'll get to that. But look, at the end of the day, we're only going to get there and sort of stand up for what we want if we do it collectively and together, right? So there was this disparate group of companies, but for all their strong cultures and their belief system and their branding and all that sort of stuff, it worked locally, but there was never any compound effect globally. Global clients didn't get it. There was different P&Ls, all this sort of stuff. That's never going to fly. That's never going to work. And the most honorable thing I can do for all these people who've built these cultures and these brands is to give them a future. Like that's more important, to give them runway where they can have more opportunity and more success and more career development and certainty than just having a rear vision mirror to reflect on the past glories. You know what I mean? I'm not interested in past glories. I've never been interested in that. I'm not a rear vision mirror person. For my entire career, you can see that's why I've moved forward at pace. Sometimes I'm falling, sometimes I'm sprinting, but I'm moving forward. And my logic was, if we unite the clans as such, imagine what we could do. Now, there's going to be some messiness in that. I don't really care about the messiness because, as I said, if we can get through that messiness, there is a promised land there. And there'll be some fallout. I knew there would be some fallout, and it's emotional. But the collective power of what we can do, because then I could also, it's within, big Accenture as well. Like we need, the name Interactive was a very logical name and a descriptor that when it was coined, the phrase was, when they named it, it probably made sense. But it was dated so quickly and it was very generic and it was sort of soulless and all that sort of stuff. And I'm an emotional person. I care about the humanity of things and the feeling and the visceral nature of things, right? And for me, I wanted a name that wasn't literal. It wasn't like does what it says on the can type of thing. And I want something that's evergreen, but also has humanity and life in it. But it also has a little bit of magic. And if I wanted to backfill it and give it some logical common sense, well, Song does that as well, because it is a universal thing. It is about technical prowess as much as it is about humanity. It can be personalized. As you said, you can riff on it, right? At the end of the day, a name is, it doesn't give us a disadvantage, but it's what we do with the name. You know what I mean? You don't start with a disadvantage, but it's on us to give it life and give it meaning. And also, to be honest, I like the sound of it and I like the look of it. And that gets you halfway there. Then the second half is going to be the work we do and the culture behind that.
Yeah.
Give it really the meaning. But it looks good. And for each office, I was very respectful. I wasn't blasé about it, thinking like get on the bandwagon or not. But I'm very much, as I said, I'm very much about where we're going, not about where we've come from. Now, where it got very complicated, and it's quite, I knew it was going to, at the end of the day, we also work in an industry where there is this conflict is a real thing. And then we only had one global brand agency, and that's Droga 5.
Yeah, the thing that's intriguing to me is, on the other side of the house, There is no such thing as conflict, and management
Crazy.
consultants don't have conflict. So, I was kind of hoping that you would be challenging the notion of conflict.
Well, I am actually. To be honest, I am trying to challenge it, but in my desire to challenge it, I can't blow things up where because as I said, Droga 5 is it's by far the best known brand in the stable. B, it's the only global one, and if we moved Droga 5 into Song, which I'm not saying is an impossibility. I'm not saying at no cost. Well, it knows if we could resolve the conflicts thing, I'm forward facing enough to be like, okay, Droga 5 can become Song.
Yeah, because it's always intrigued me that, and let's use McKinsey, could be any of them, but I'll use McKinsey to illustrate it. In my time working in a bank, they would turn up and you could tell they were bringing the learning that they'd accumulated from every other exco in every other bank, and you would benefit from it. Now, they never crossed the line of confidentiality and they never broke the ethical code, but they bought the expertise because they knew the sector. And advertising, which almost has no significant data anymore. No client gives, that notion of agencies being business partners is lovely but flawed. So, I think you should challenge. I mean,
We are. We're trying because, as I said, we're definitely doing that. I mean, it's so funny. You hit the nail on the head, which is like now operations or our Industry X or our tech. Having multiple players in a category is, you become experts, especially.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And obviously there's the barrier, so nothing proprietary or confidential is shared. But maybe it's an insecurity within our industry at large that still makes that allows that to exist. But we're slowly trying to break that down. But it's look, it's the early days. It's a big, I want to close it. It'll be in year one, September 1st will be my first year. I want us to it's been about bringing us together to hopefully give us sort of a common purpose or a common, not just nomenclature, but just sort of also sort of a strategy, some principles about what we believe in and what we're striving, what's going to set some benchmarks. Shown that we've done that with our growth. As I said, we'll sort of be 14 billion by the end of the year. Talent, make sure that we show that we've got great new talent from disparate industries want to join this, and in real positions. So it's not just sort of headlines, but people who are given opportunity. And that's what I would say to anyone that's coming is the opportunities to actually impact more industries is greater here than anywhere I've seen in my career. So if I was a creative person, I'd be like, wow, I want to work on more influential things. I want to not be sort of just at the interior decorating phase of the industry. I want to get into sort of that and the architecture and the engineering, and what I mean? Like that's where we can get in there and solve problems for our clients that we've never been invited in the room to do. And I was lucky at Droga 5 that more than any time in my career, I was invited into sort of the rooms where relations with CEOs was pretty amazing. I was very fortunate to have that. But there were sometimes some of the challenges they were facing, I knew we couldn't solve alone at Droga 5, no matter how talented we were.
And what work have you got so far, David? Because you've always been about the work. I mean, in these 10 months, are things happening that you're looking at going, that's what I want more of that?
When I first came in, I was sort of came in like a bull, sort of like, okay, let me see the work. I'm assuming that we're not doing any good work. And you sort of dig and you'd be like, wow, we're doing some incredible things here. Maybe we don't tell our story of how we're doing it well. The biggest difference, this is the biggest difference between Accenture and the advertising industry, or Droga 5 and Song. In the industry, you do whenever you do something good or great, you shout it from the rooftops, right? We share it, we socialize it, we make sure that everyone knows that we did it. There are some incredible things that Accenture does that they're not allowed to talk about, that their clients won't let them talk about. That my job is to sort of find out how can we do more consistent work across the board. What are the benchmarks? What is considered great? What is considered valuable? What showcases our talents that only we can do? And there's best in class that I want us to always do, and there's fresh in class. Like what's the freshest thing that no one else can do? Do you know what I mean? They're the two benchmarks that I sort of want to hit. And best in class should become game stakes that maybe some other companies and agencies could do, but I always want us to feel like we're doing some of the best in the world. And as I said, but we also have to lean into the stuff that only we can do. That sort of end-to-end, as I said, complementary tech, data, technology where we're actually really infused in our clients' business. And so we're trying to prove that out. And I do see some great things we're doing. I mean, some of the stuff that we're doing in Japan or Australia or Europe. I mean, there's a couple of things that I'm excited about. It's so funny. Like this, you can't sort of change habits. I still remember it from when I was in Australia, Singapore, London. I'd always have lists of things that are, sounds unfair, but things that I always think that at all costs, we have to preserve and save and make sure it gives a disproportionate amount of energy to happen, because there are just ideas that need to, I've described this to someone recently. I was saying, a lot of people, when they talk about an idea or something, they get excited and it's like fireworks and, wow, this is amazing. I'm the exact opposite. As soon as I hear an idea, or let's say in my early days, if it was an idea I had, or when I became a fully fledged creative director or someone else's idea, if I hear an idea that I think has potential or is great, I immediately get almost mad, because I almost get mad that it hasn't happened yet, and I immediately jump to like, what the fuck is going to ruin this? What's going to stop this from happening? If this doesn't happen, I'm going to be so furious. Yeah. So then I get into sort of defensive mode, which is, what do we need to do to protect, grow, make sure this happens, it's legitimate. So I always have these lists of like, what warrants a disproportionate amount of time to protect and to prove it out. And I'm not talking about it like, oh, this is because this is going to win an award, or because I'm thinking things that are going to raise the benchmark of what is possible for us creatives and prove our worth to our clients, and hopefully have a massive contribution to society. Like, that's the sweet spot for me, is you do something that, I've always cared about the ramifications of things beyond my peers.
Good. So on that, I mean, I know that your platform speech in Cannes, No Idea Too Big, was kind of interrupted by Greenpeace out front. And I love the irony of that, doing some great viral marketing in very old-fashioned.
That's what I was saying. It's like they're just validating that everyone needs advertising. Do you know what I mean? They're trying to climb up the front of the Palais and put up a banner that talks about their issues. And look, I love Greenpeace. My mother used to chain herself to trees in Australia to stop bulldozers. So I'm all about protecting the environment. And I'm not saying I want them to do that, but it all comes down to communication. Whatever. You need to get people's attention, whatever your message is. So, but no idea is too big. I mean, look, I wanted to start this thing because I was also aware that I didn't want to just give a stump speech there. And that's why I didn't want to talk about my belief in creativity. People know me as a creative person. So with me talking about creative and why I believe it's important and how important, if they don't know that about me, then that's. So for me, I just wanted to sort of tip my hat to some of the people that I feel like when I walked in, I'm like, wow, we can do that. We have tech people that can, as I said, like, we're partnering, putting rockets on space. We're doing R&D in space. We're not just doing campaigns that are sort of data thing, but we're actually creating algorithms that governments are using around it. Like, people smarter than I've ever dealt with, who they look to us and they're thinking, wow, you guys can make people care about what we do, and you can create storytelling and narrative and, opportunities for, like, and that's where I'm like, there isn't any ideas too big, because so much of what, even from Droga 5 or my days at Saatchi's, we would present massive ideas, and let's say we present a deck, and usually by and large you end up making the stuff in the front of the deck, because that's what your skill set is. And Droga 5, we delved into sometimes the middle of the deck, things that others couldn't really do, but we could pull off, and there was always the stuff that you wish you could have done at the back that no one had any idea how to pull off. Yeah. This is now the first time I was like, actually, imagine you have the capability and skill set to pull off anything. So now it just comes down to, are your ideas good enough? I joke that, if your idea is to blow up the moon, there's probably a department in Accenture that specializes in blowing up small planets. You're like, what? They're like, oh yeah, there's those people in Belgium. They've blown up some small planets before. That's what they do. You know what I mean? It's like, it's that type of thing where I'm like, what? Not that I'm suggesting we blow up the moon, but people that, like, everyone's talking about metaverse, and it is exciting and it's hype bubble, but it's also, amazing, and it will change a lot of things. I'm talking to people in the sort of innovation labs in our France divisions, and they're like, oh yeah, we've been working on it. We have 600 patents in the blockchain. that we've been doing this, we're sort of working on the new headsets for X company. I'm like, oh, you really know this sort of stuff. You're not just suddenly getting on board and giving someone who used to be a producer a metaverse title now because it's putting them into a meeting. Which, knowing you have these people with that deeper knowledge, it puts more pressure on us to do the right thing, because we've got to move from sort of like the jazz hands of things to like, okay, you know, how can I, but I still always bet on imagination, creativity is this thing that is going to be the magic sauce that allows us to do things that.
And back in the WFA conference earlier this year in Athens, I think it was 75% of the members were saying they didn't think marketing was compatible with a sustainable future, which is, you know, a worrying stat, because I sat in Cannes thinking this is the industry that needs to power up its imagination to help fix that problem too. And you're in the kind of seat that can do something about that too. How are you feeling about sustainability, where the world is, what the big issues are, and can Song fix them?
Song can try and help fix it. We can be one part player in it. The responsibility, the onus is on us to definitely do that. And look, the two big bets for us, and we've been very public about it, and it should be for all corporations, and it's ironic because it is the metaverse and sustainability, and they're both at very different places. One is about protecting the world we're in now, and one is about defining this virtual new world. At the end of the day, if we don't address the sustainability one, it's all for naught. You know what I mean? It goes back to my background again. My mother, environmental activist, and you know, so that's actually something that I've always grown up believing. You know, I was the kid calling back in the day when you could call a minister or a senator, whatever. You know, you had their home phone number. You know, my mum would have us calling, going, "Save the whales," and you know, it was all that time. Really, seriously. Absolutely, I feel like, you know, we've set up our legitimate sustainability divisions within Song. We spend a lot of time talking to clients to understand. It's got to be one of those things where we do it in concert with our clients. It can't just be the sort of greenwashing thing. But look, if 70% of the people say marketing is incompatible with sustainability, it depends what marketing is. Marketing is just, it's as much about making people understand and information and care about things. If we can make people care about how they live their lives, and also holding corporations and governments to account, that's where the biggest difference is. It's not just about, you know, yes, we can convince everyone to recycle and stop using plastic straws, but that's not going to head off at the pass the bigger issues. You know, and we need to make the companies we work with and who we work for, hold them accountable. You know, thankfully more corporations than not realize that their futures are tied into being more transparent about that. But I think marketing, the best of us, is one of the few levers that can help save what we're doing. I really believe it. We have to.
Yeah, no, I mean, Sir David Attenborough says that sustainability is now a communications problem, which
It is. I mean, look, you mentioned David Attenborough, and if you've ever seen any interviews with me, he's probably one of my greatest heroes. Like, honestly, bar none. You know, and because why? He educated the world, and he told stories, and he opened the world up to all of us to see what it is and what it could, you know, he opened it up. It was amazing. From being a pleb in Australia, watching his documentary, I mean, it was just unbelievable. We need to make people see beyond themselves, to see beyond their own lifetimes, to see beyond their own backyards, see beyond, and care about it for their kids and all that. And that is a communication thing. That's a values thing. And I feel like that's what we're in the business of. We're not just about selling shit. You know what I mean? Yeah. We're about and hopefully we make people care about the things they should care about. And I've been privileged in my career to try and divert it and spend it on things that I believe matter. I'm not embarrassed that I've sold beer or sneakers or stuff like that. But, I think that the more energy that we put into things that are going to sort of lift us all up and have a more positive contribution beyond business is a great thing. And that's why I've sort of, back in the day, I didn't hide my influence on trying to influence politics or with UNICEF. I've always tried to sort of...
Yeah, I mean, and if people haven't seen it, they should look up The Great Schlep, because, what Droga did to help Obama in Florida. I mean, brilliant insight, data-based as well, but just lovely work that made a difference. You must have felt great about that.
I mean, one of those things that, I've felt like, I couldn't donate $1 billion, and I'm not sort of in the back rooms of DC, but if I can contribute with doing something that's going to help move the needle forward for something I believe is needs to happen. And you're right, it wasn't insight. It was much an insight as it was the bravery to do a creative thing that was connected to community. It wasn't just film or something like that. It was actually an activation, get people motivated. I mean, 25,000 kids flew down to Florida to get their grandparents to know about Obama. And it's enjoyable to do, and I was very proud to do it. Again, it's such a simple thing. I would say to anyone, like, honestly, don't you just want to be proud of the work you make? Like, all bullshit aside, all accolades, all stories, all your colleagues, all your titles, whatever your salary is, don't you want to sort of go to sleep at night thinking, wow, I did that. Like something that, whatever role you play in it, I contribute to that and made this happen, and I've left a trail of something, goodness. That's all I've, and and if you can raise it to a level where it has societal impact, why wouldn't you want to do that?
Love that. I would usually end by asking you what should be at the top of a CMO's agenda right now, but I think you just said it actually.
Yeah, it is. Look, there's a lot of pressure on all CMOs, right? Because the world has changed. It's had such an enormous change on its axis just in the last couple of years. Like the future isn't what it used to be. So the playbook that they've all sort of leaned into and read doesn't necessarily work now. And that's as much because of geopolitics, technology, global viruses, all that sort of stuff, consumer behavior, talent, people's attitude to what a job is or who they want to work for, brands they want to. So there's so many, the shifting sands are enormous. But I just think that's the thing, realizing that every corporation can do much more than they realize they can. In lieu of governments, every corporation is a citizen as well of a society. Now you don't want to overstep that mark. With that comes great responsibility, and it also can be joyful. But going back to that thing of pride, do it with pride. If you honestly feel like what you're making and shaping and influencing and building and creating, you do it with, you really think at the end of the day when the lights are out, you did the right thing or you're trying to do the right thing, that's amazing. Because I'll say to anyone, it takes the same amount of energy to try and do something great as it does to justify something average. So why wouldn't you try and do something great?
Yeah, good. Well, listen, David, what a fantastic conversation. Really, really enjoyed listening to you, and I wish you all the best with Song, which I think too can do extraordinary things. And actually, you've got a disparate bunch of companies. If you can gel it like that, oh my word.
Well, I'm trying. Yeah, there's no guarantees with anything, but I'm certainly trying, and I'm privileged to have got a lot of great people. But it's for us and for our industry and for sort of all our clients. But it's a good challenge. It's a good challenge.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for all your time.
You come to New York, look me up.
I will indeed. Thank you again to David Droga for giving us so much of his valuable time. And looking forward to the next episode, but we're taking a bit of a break for the summer, so enjoy the back catalogue. We'll be back in September, this time with Suzanne Akkad, Senior Vice President, Local and Cultural Platforms, Corporate Innovation at Estée Lauder. So from creativity to client. Enjoy your summers, everybody.